It's now time for your Election Crimes Bulletin with Greg Palast.
And in one moment, we're going to welcome Greg back, but he has helped us make a connection with a very special guest that we are delighted to introduce. And joining us is C.K. Hoffler. She is the chair of the National Board of Rainbow Push Coalition. She is a longtime attorney. She's been in the battle to save people's vote in Georgia, in Atlanta, wow. Well, C.K. Hoffler, welcome to Flashpoints. All your skills, you've got a lifetime of skills apparently, all sharpened for this moment. What's it look like on the ground now? You think people are going to be able to vote fairly in Georgia, in Atlanta? How's that look? What's it looking like?
Well, I don't think it's going to be easy for people to vote fairly in Georgia. And first of all, thank you for having me on the show. And the reason why I say that is because voter suppression is alive and well in Georgia. You know, Greg Palast, who is phenomenal, you all know he's phenomenal, and Vigilante really underscores in graphic detail exactly how voter suppression is manifesting itself in Georgia. And quite frankly, it's not just Georgia, it's throughout the country, but it is so specific to the voting history in Georgia, and the movie brings it to modern day voter suppression. So to answer your question succinctly, no, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for some people to vote and for us to have free and fair elections in Georgia because of the voter suppression. But by the same token, there are many, many civil rights, grassroots organizations in the field, on the ground in Georgia that are making sure that people are registered to vote. Because the key to the elections with this these very contentious elections in Georgia, the key is really to register voters. Because we're in a voter suppression state, without a question. We have very strong legislation that you all have heard this, that preclude people from even giving someone standing in line water or something to eat. So if someone has a medical condition requiring them, or where water would make a difference, or if they needed a little snack, it could be people who would try to tender just for the basic humanity could be arrested in Georgia. So we are confronting voter suppression on all levels, from the closing of voting stations to minimizing significantly absentee ballots, to you name it. The classic voter suppression is now alive and well in Georgia. And also people challenging people's ballots. I mean, that is the most, I think, devastating aspect of what's happening in Georgia. And Vigilante, again, underscores this. So if you just imagine yourself in a situation where you haven't moved, there's no reason why your vote should be challenged. You are properly registered to vote, and someone just challenges your vote, challenges your ballot, without even you knowing the person or without them even investigating it. That's what can happen in Georgia, and that's what is happening.
And I know that you understand in the context of the history of the battle for the vote, particularly in the South, blood has been spilled. How do you see this historically? We thought we were sort of past this thing about people actually having the basic right to vote. Are you surprised? Where do you think the hope lies? We got a big battle ahead of us to fight for the vote.
We really do. You know, I can say I really wasn't surprised, because ever since the 2013 U.S. Supreme Court opinion, Shelby County versus Holder, ever since that crushing opinion was inked, voting rights in states like Georgia, and actually throughout the country, have been curtailed, have been limited, have been cut, have been challenged, have been an issue, because all of the protections, the federal protections that existed, especially as related to ensuring that there be minimal or no discrimination at the polls, were stripped. And that was Shelby County versus Holder. The late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg inked the I would say, just incredibly strong dissenting opinion in that case, and basically outlined how voter suppression, what we could expect to happen in voter suppression. So since 2013, the states have been in control of administering the elections and did not have to report or do any of the things that they had to do with pre-clearances previously under the law, under federal law. before Shelby County versus Holder. So what we are seeing right now in terms of voting stations being closed and the various acts of voter suppression are the direct result of that opinion. So I'm not surprised. But what is surprising is the tenacity of those who are just determined to strip away people's right to vote when we know in this country historically people died so that I might have the right to vote.
Just about 20 years ago, I was traveling around the South investigating dozens of black church burnings. You may remember there were over 100. And I remember I got to Alabama, and that's when I got my first lesson about the nature of voter suppression in the South. When Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, I learned, had made a career on stopping black people from voting. So while we were investigating the black church burnings and the Klan and all that, he was investigating why these black people kept burning their own churches and accusing other people of stopping them from voting. You ever heard stories like this?
I have. I've had, when you live in the South, I'm originally from up north, but I've lived in Georgia for a decade, and I lived in Florida prior to Georgia. And when you live in some of these states, which are very, very acutely aware of the fact that when people have the right to vote, that could change the demographic, that could change the entire demographic of, or the political posture of certain counties, of certain places when they have the right to vote. And it could change who is elected. There is increased voter suppression, because if you don't allow people to vote their conscience and to vote who they feel puts forth their best interest, then you won't have the opportunity for us to see the outcome when they're free and fair elections. But if you do allow people to vote, then we see different outcomes. In the last presidential elections, people were allowed to vote in Georgia and in many states because of COVID. There were different measures that were put in place because of COVID to enable people to vote. Well, those things have been reversed. So we're expecting that voter suppression is going to be an all-time high. So none of this surprises me. In Alabama, in places Alabama, Texas, Wisconsin, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, all of these states there are at least 20 states in this union, maybe 22, that have very significant voter suppression laws.
Right.
And so we're just turning back the clock. And I'm reminded of people who died, who were killed so that we might have the right to vote. So it's very, very distressing. But to counter that, we are seeing groups mobilizing very aggressively in communities to ensure that people have the right to vote. You have to realize that in places like Georgia, there are communities in Georgia and rural parts of Georgia where they don't have access to the internet. So when you have people that have been illegally stripped from the voting rolls, and Greg Palast did a phenomenal job at documenting this, and there was clear evidence of this, and we had voting litigation surrounding that. When you have that, as was the case in Georgia, where we believe prior to the presidential elections or prior to the Senate runoff race where John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock were running, close to 200,000 Georgians were illegally stricken from the rolls. When you have situations like that occurring, it's imperative that people check their voting status. They have to go to votingrights.org or just check their status. But if you don't have access to the internet, forget about high-speed internet, just the internet, as is the case in rural Georgia, then you can't check that status. So that's why organizations such as Rainbow Push Coalition, Transformative Justice Coalition, the People's Agenda, Black Voters Matter Fund, and others in Georgia are critical. They play a very, very important role because they help people to register to vote. They go in those communities. They knock on their doors. They ensure that people have the option and give them the ability to check their voting status and to register to vote. That's really important. And it's not just Georgia. All of these communities in all these states in the South, you see rural communities where people don't have access to the internet, basic things. That's why, during COVID, when we had children learning, learning virtually. Well, you have to have a computer to learn virtually. You have to have access not just to the internet, but high-speed internet to learn virtually. So that's a real problem in terms of education and voter education in some of these southern states where there's very poor or limited access to high-speed internet that would enable people to vote and to vote their conscience and to vote what they feel is best.
Beautiful. Well said. That's C.K. Hoffler. She is the chair of the National Board of the Rainbow Push Coalition. She is an attorney. She has been representing folks who are having their votes stolen. And there's a guy here on the other line. I know he's banging down the wall to get in. I think he might have some questions for you. His name is Greg Palast. He is the filmmaker of Vigilante, Georgia's vote suppression hitman. This is consider this a friendly ambush. I know Greg has some questions for you as well, Greg. Join us.
It's got to be friendly because CK has acted as attorney of record for the Palace Investigative Fund. But more important, we went into federal court, and just so you know, she's not just an attorney. She is, besides Reverend Jesse Jackson's personal attorney, if I remember correctly, too, and head of Rainbow Push as the chairwoman. But she's the former president of the National Bar Association and has been, at the forefront of this fight. And we went into federal court. She mentioned 198,000 Georgians wrongly removed, which, as you know from the Election Crimes Bulletin, we uncovered this. We had the experts. This is all, by the way, in the film Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman. And one of the things is now with this vigilante voter system, maybe, and by the way, a couple things, the CK has seen the film, and by the way, I appreciate the fact, CK, that according to Santita Jackson, that you were tweeting or texting her in the middle of the film saying, you got to see this girl, it's powerful.
I was.
Okay, so she didn't make that one up.
No, she didn't make it up. I was in the middle. I couldn't believe it. It was, first of all, Greg, you are phenomenal. And I don't know if people completely appreciate your brilliance and what you have done in uncovering this voter suppression, especially in Georgia. But it's not just limited to Georgia. Yes. You could pick any state in the union, and you would see you would see a replica of this type of voter suppression. It's just the evidence is baffling in Georgia. I think what was so unique about your movie, about this movie Vigilante, was that you had actual people who had been victims and who are victims today, as we speak, of voter suppression. People who had been stricken from those roles by people, or whose ballot had been challenged by people who knew nothing about them, didn't know anything about them. They just got a random list, of course, put in front of them by people who nefarious groups or groups that are there designed to win the Senate seat in Georgia by any means necessary. And then there are people that were just challenging the ballots. And when these people were confronted with the people whose ballots they were challenging, the vote they were challenging, they basically had nothing to say. They were just making up stuff as they went along. And I think the way that you juxtaposed the actual people who were victims with the people who were the perpetrators of this voter suppression was nothing short of brilliant. And then, of course, to expose and to have the country understand the history of Brian Kemp and his family and being the family who brought slavery to the state of Georgia. It was also something that was masterfully done. And I think everyone needs to see this movie. It's not just about Georgia, but it's relevant.
Say that again now. Say that again. The guy who's running against Stacey Abrams. What's his connection?
His family, and Greg, you can say it, but his family was the family that brought slavery to Georgia, to the state of Georgia. His family. Now, you can't rewrite history. You can change your last name, but you can't rewrite history. And what this movie does, what Vigilante does, it traces his family. Now, these are just things that are facts that are I don't believe they're in dispute. So I think that this movie is very rich with historical significance. It's rich with the present day voter suppression. It's rich with concrete examples of how voter suppression actually manifests itself in this country, using Georgia as an example. But please mark my words, it is not unique to Georgia. This is happening throughout this nation.
Yeah,
so that's why everybody needs to see this.
Thank you, CK. And by the way, it is a movie. It's not just good for you information. It's not a textbook. It is a movie.
It is.
I was just watching it today with George DiCaprio, who is the executive producer, and it's weirdly it's harsh, but it's entertaining, and there's a lot of humor. But one of the things that you brought up, CK, is that yes, it's Georgia, but It is every state is whatever is tested out by the GOP in Georgia. And by the way, I'm not being partisan by saying that all 88 vigilante vote challengers with 250,000 challenges to voters, all 88 are Republican officials. And overwhelmingly, the people that they are attacking and that you meet in the film are African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and young people. Basically, they're going after voters of the color being blue. It's not partisan. This is just factual. And at the beginning of the film, it's introduced by Martin Sheen. And he explains it's coming, just like the film, he says it's coming to a state near you. Bloomberg just reported that the Georgia Vigilante Voter Challenge system has now moved to 9 other states: Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, and, of course, Arizona. And if you might recognize that, as those are the states that are going to swing the U.S. Senate. So they take this method that they used in Georgia and that C.K. Hoffler and Rainbow Push have been fighting, and they're taking it on the road. I mean, it could determine, remember that Biden won Wisconsin officially by just 10,000 votes. The people that are funding the challenge in Georgia are Wisconsin billionaires, which we show in the film. Wisconsin billionaires, the Bradley family, and they are using it in Wisconsin, where, again, Biden just won by 10,000 votes. Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor, and of course he's African American, and his constituents are facing these purges and attacks. Everything you see in Georgia is happening in Milwaukee, which is, by the way, why Milwaukee State Senator Lena Taylor in Milwaukee is having a showing of the film in Milwaukee on Saturday, because she says, it says Atlanta, but it sure looks like Milwaukee when we were looking at what they're doing.
All right, listen, everybody. We're just about out of time, and what an honor to have you with us, C.K. Hoffler, and the incredible work you do as chair of the National Board of Rainbow Push Coalition, as Jesse Jackson, my hero, working with Jesse Jackson and being his attorney. It's an honor to have you with us. We hope you win this battle with the help of Greg Palast against voter suppression. And I hope you'll come back and keep us posted on the frontline battle for the vote in Georgia. Really would love to have you come back and talk to us again.
Absolutely. I'd love to come. And anytime I cannot express to your listeners how important it is to see vigilante. I cannot express how important it is, because it will open your eyes to things that we just don't want to see. It's going to make you feel uncomfortable, but it's also very entertaining. I mean, there are topics in there and situations that will move you, but also Greg has a unique way of putting together a movie that also has humor. And sometimes you laugh to keep from crying. Let's just say it. But it's a great movie. It's entertaining. It's filled with historical significance and legal significance and relevance to today's environment. So I hope that everybody will see it and also vote. Having the right to vote is not a partisan issue. Everyone should have the right to vote. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican. Just let people vote. What's the big deal? And I think that is when you see voter suppression, it makes you feel some kind of way, because if you let people just vote, that is the American way. That is democracy. That's what it is to be, I believe, in this country. Anything short of that is voter suppression and designed to take us back to one of the dark eras in our country that we do not want to revisit. And that's where we're headed if we're not very careful.
Thank you so much for joining us on Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. Stay safe. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.